that everybody turn the microphones on so you got a green light in front of you. And when June 6, 2019 City Council study session. And I would ask Councilmember Nutting to please lead us in the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please let the record show that all council members are present. And council, if I may, we have consultants here with us tonight, and they have a hard stop at 9 o'clock. This work study is for the purpose of us. This is our chance to get some information. And so I am going to move straight into our discussion items, which is a little bit out of the ordinary for us, but we only have 2 hours, and I want to make sure that we get our questions, get the communication, and get our questions answered. So the first of the discussion items is a START committee update, and we have had a change there. So I'll start with a motion to accept the resignation of START committee member Ken Rogers and to nominate Steve Edmonston as his replacement.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion made by, well, started by myself, but made by Councilmember Nutting, seconded by Councilmember Bangs. Any discussion?
You do look a lot alike.
Oh, I just heard a voice. Sorry, let it.
What I used to look like.
Give me a sec. Let me make, the motion was made by Deputy Mayor Pennington.
Not that old.
You guys can arm wrestle over this later. I'm giving the second to Councilmember Bangs. We have a comment from City Manager Mathias.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to acknowledge the effort and work of Ken Rogers on behalf of the city on the START committee. He's a valuable participant. He ran into a conflict with a local business called the Quarter Deck. Encourage everyone to go. But we just wanted to thank Ken and at the same time kind of acknowledge appreciation of all the effort that Steve has put into helping us move forward. Just wanted that to be out there.
Absolutely, and I think per typical protocol, we'll draft a letter acknowledging him and send that to him. So with that, is there any other comment? Okay, all those in favor of Steve Edmonston joining our START committee, please raise your right hand and say aye.
Aye.
Probably should have asked Steve, but since we didn't, hey, Steve, welcome aboard the committee. Thank you. Okay. This will jump us right into our aviation topics, and turn the floor over to Michael Mathias.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, we're going. Yes. Okay. So this evening is actually this entire day, in fact, portions of yesterday. We've had the opportunity to have some very dynamic conversations with our aviation consultants. And let me provide a little bit of background. Our consultants with us today are James Allerdice, Jason Schwartz, and Emily Tranter, and they're here, and they're going to be answering questions and presenting information. And originally, the four cities, Des Moines, Burien, SeaTac, and ourselves, had come together and contracted with these consultants, each city making a financial commitment to the process so that they would be available to help us in the environmental review of the Sustainable Airport Master Plan. And that involved originally helping us with the scoping efforts, which identify the elements that need to be included in environmental review, at least from our perspective. And the cities joined through their SEPA officials, and Susan Cesar's here, she's our city SEPA official, and the other cities have their SEPA officials. So we came together, SEPA officials and the consultants, and made comments on the scoping and submitted those to the Port of Seattle. At the same time, the city made an individual letter identifying elements we were concerned about being in the scoping. So now what's happened is that we're waiting for the port needs to respond to the scoping letters and comments, and then they're going forward with their environmental review of the SAMP process. And so our consultants working with our SEPA officials will now, the next thing is that when the port issues their environmental documents, we will now comment on those documents for sufficiency in mitigating impacts from the proposed growth at SeaTac. So along the way, we then thought it would be helpful, given the city's commitment, the council's commitment, the work of our aviation advisory committee, the work of staff, to engage the consultants for a day in Des Moines. And we made it a full day. We started at 11, took a tour, had lunch, met with about 30 staff, just to assure that our staff understands the issues. Had some more meetings, had a senior staff meeting, had an aviation advisory committee meeting, and now we're doing the joint council aviation advisory committee. So that's kind of the background of how they're here. And I want to mention that yesterday we had a meeting in Burien called by Brian, who's here, of the 4 cities and the consultants, just to discuss activities related to the interlocal agreement on the scoping and environmental review of the SAMP. That's a separate contract. Now, and the city of Des Moines is engaged in a separate contract for today to have our consultants here to answer questions and help us with strategic planning. So we're very pleased. They've been very resilient. Hopefully they can last through one more session. Yeah. So what we've done is introduce everyone. I think it's fairly evident through our name cards, but what I'd like to do is acknowledge, and if each member of our Aviation Advisory Committee could identify themselves, maybe starting with Dave.
Oh, it's here already. I'm sorry. Sheila Brush?
Steve Edmiston.
And on the phone? Mark Pruitt, yeah, great. So that's 5 members of the Aviation Advisory Committee. And so, does this work? Anyways, Tara, you want to move up? Okay, so, you know, we've talked before often about challenges for our city. Because of our proximity to SeaTac Airport, we face significant impacts from aircraft operations. And the primary challenge that we all face, and I know there are people here from Federal Way, Burien, and other municipalities watching or involved, is that the cities proximate to the airport suffer disproportionate impacts of the aircraft operations. And while the region enjoys economic benefits, proximity determines where the balance point for that is. And for all of our cities, our proximity to the airport shifts the balance away from fairness and to disproportionate impacts suffered by our residents and businesses. So that's the primary issue. And at the same time, SeaTac, since 2012, has had year-over-year double-digit growth without environmental review of those impacts. Now they're starting the SAMP, and they are looking forward to 66 million passengers at some point, and they're currently at about 45 million, and they probably experience the neighborhood of 40% growth in 7 years. Okay, so we think that one critical issue regarding the SAMP is that the baseline is not 2018 or 2019. Baseline's 2012. And we'd like to see mitigation for where we are now, before anybody starts talking about growth at the airport. So that was one of the primary comments we made in our scoping. But the result of that disproportionality impacts noise, health, traffic congestion, sleep disruption, the impact of fuel emissions, and other types of impacts. Okay, our consultants are here today to help us better understand how we respond to these. And we had two primary requests of them in terms of briefings and information. And one was looking at what's the SAMP really about? What's up with that? They've got 3 runways. They're, utilizing one that never really received environmental clearance as far as we're concerned relative to the 3rd runway. And they've increased frequency of flights and operations dramatically. So is there a rationale behind how the SAMP is structured in order, what are they trying to achieve? Simultaneous takeoffs, there's there's lineal feet that has to be observed in order to do that, so what's this really all about? And the second is, strategies we can develop to successfully mitigate and minimize impacts of the airport. And given the fact that we're a city of 31,000 people in proximity to the airport, with no jurisdiction over the FAA, no jurisdiction over the port, no jurisdiction over the airport, no jurisdiction over the airlines, no jurisdiction over the FAA, I might have already said that. What do? How can we go about protecting and representing our own interests relative to the airport and the port? And that's what we asked. We thought it could take them about half an hour to come up with that. No, kidding. What we learned is an exceedingly complex issue. But we wanted to brief the council and the Aviation Advisory Committee and have an interactive discussion about strategic planning in order to move forward and accomplish the most possible for our city in mitigating impacts. Next, please, Tara. So just a brief summary of actions that we've taken. These are not inclusive. Many of the people at this table and staff in the audience, residents have participated in a number of these. We're involved in the ultrafine particle study initiated by Representative Orwell, being conducted by the University of Washington. I'm personally on the Technical Advisory Committee. I see John Reesing here. I think you're on that committee as well from Federal Way. That was initiated by Representative Orwell. It was picked up by Congressman Adam Smith. He had legislation passed in Washington to expand the ultrafine particle analysis to other airports, similar to what we're doing here. We're involved in the SeaTac Airport Stakeholder Roundtable Committee. There's a noise subcommittee. There's a federal legislation subcommittee. Much of our discussion today was about ways the city participation. This is the committee that Sheila is on, I'm on it, and Steve was just appointed to. And this is about finding ways to make that committee effective relative to outcomes. And what can come of that committee, in partnership to mitigate impacts. And that's a challenge. The city in the past couple of years, we convened the Aviation Advisory Committee, whose members are here tonight, and they've been exceedingly focused on finding ways the city can engage with the airport and with whatever authorities to help mitigate impacts. We were very involved and active in supporting Representative Orwell and Senator Kaiser in establishing a siting committee for a 2nd regional airport in Washington State through the legislature. They introduced legislation to establish a committee and to fund that committee. And it's extraordinary that the House voted 96-0 in support of it. The state Senate voted 48-0 in support of it. It was the first year that the Port of Seattle supported this activity. So we had unanimous concurrence that this is a worthwhile undertaking and critical. Also, we participate in the SeaTac baseline impact study that was funded through efforts by Representative Orwell and other representatives to establish what the baseline is of airport impacts in our region, and also known as the budget proviso. That's $300,000 from the legislature and $300,000 mostly from SeaTac, the city, but we also are participated in this, the financing of this study, and are involved in it. They recently chose consultants to undertake this study. It specifies it's not an environmental review, and it's an update of the 1997 or 98 study that was done. So this is an update to establish the baseline impacts from which one could then go, and it's not part of the study, could then say, well, what are the mitigation strategies? And the timing is more or less consistent with what's going on with the SAMP, may not be exact. So those are some of our activities to date. Is there one after this? Yeah, we talked about the SAMP, the environmental review, and I think that's the last slide. So what we want to do is kind of open it up, and I think maybe what might be helpful, calling on you guys without telling you, is just talk a little about kind of what your experience has been here, what you've seen in the city, and some of the ideas perhaps that we've discussed, and then we'll open it up to the council and the Aviation Advisory Committee. Thank you.
I will start. So first of all, I think just thank you so much for having us here. Jim's going to set something up that I think will be useful and interesting. But so I'm Emily Tranter, and you know, my experience professionally has been engaging with cities who are airport adjacent for the last 12 years. That's been one of my major focuses. And one of the most heartening things I've seen today, and through working with you, with your city and the other 3 cities, is the willingness and level of engagement from the cities themselves. You know, not just the residents, but from elected officials and city officials. And so, a couple of things that just struck me as really encouraging is that this is a very complex issue, and it's extremely, you know, it can be wrought with confusion or emotion or, you know, just lots of things with airport noise and airport impacts. And coming to the decision to sort of really put resources behind that to address them is a really, I mean, it sounds glib, but it's a really great first step, and it's so important, I think. And I see, you know, I've seen successes across the country, and I've seen fits and starts, and I think that if you really have a plan of action, that there can be some really meaningful tools implemented that will help with advocating to the airport for meaningful solutions that actually will help your residents, and for both from an environmental standpoint and from just a noise standpoint. And so that level of engagement is really encouraging. Jason, I don't know if you have anything you want to add while Jim sets up, but he looks ready.
I'm ready.
But anyway, yeah, so I'll pass it over to Jim. I guess I would just say that really our philosophy as a team is to make sure that communities are well represented and well, you know, have that technical background and support to help them in these arenas. So that will kind of tee off what my colleague, my more technical colleague, has to share with you.
Thank you, Emily. My name's Jim Allerdice. My background is air traffic control. I started out in 1980, joined the Air Force, went to Del Rio, Texas, Laughlin Air Force Base for a few years, and then went up to Grissom Air Force Base in Indiana. Then I got in the FAA in November 1983. Worked at New Orleans International Airport, Lansing Capital City Airport, and in January 1991, I went to Atlanta, Hartsfield. And I've been there ever since. I retired in November of 2014 from the FAA. The last 10 years of my tenure there at Atlanta, I was a support specialist in charge of implementation of NextGen, which is a 4-letter word, I know. But one of the things that entailed was airspace and procedure design. And so I designed all the RNAV infrastructure for Atlanta. RNAV is known as area navigation, and it's the satellite navigation that aircraft use. And so we designed the highways in the sky that the aircraft use. We use this software. It's called Targets. It's something that the FAA has been using for several years. It's been modified and upgraded over and over and over. But basically what it is a design tool that allows us to make sure that all the procedures pass FAA criteria and that we're getting the most efficient use of airspace possible. So what I'm going to do tonight is just kind of relay to you guys, how that process works a little bit. So I'm kind of jumping to the end, which is the technical stuff that we did, and we'll get back into some of the other discussions. But this is just some ATC 101 about how air traffic control in this airspace works. One of the things that I was able to do in Atlanta, and when I was with the FAA, was actually work collaboratively with the communities that surrounded the airport to determine where the routes, the departure tracks should go. We went in and had public meetings very similar to this, got feedback from the citizens and from the city councils, and made a determination on what would work best for the communities as well as for the airport. That allowed us to implement, the relationships that we built during that allowed us to implement the Metroplex plan in Atlanta without lawsuits. So I cut my teeth on community engagement back then when I was actually in the FAA, and I've carried it forward. This has become kind of a niche for us that pretty much, not to my knowledge, very many other environmental consultants are in this niche on the community side. There's a lot of them that are on the airport side, but not very many on the community side. So I just want to do a quick overview of the airspace around Seattle and some idiosyncrasies that affect you all directly. One of the things that we talked about last night was the Burien turnout. I will not debate the legality of it tonight, but because I know that's an ongoing issue that will be addressed, but I do want to discuss a little bit some options of what there can be done and why they did what they did. So if you can follow the bouncing pointer here, these two yellow lines here actually represent the airspace in which the aircraft could turn. So if the aircraft depart off of one of the runways here and turn left, I think now they're turning left to 250 heading, which is more down this way. They could turn as far left as 210 degrees, or they could turn as far north as 280 degrees, actually 285 degrees, but this is like 280. Terminal controllers usually use round numbers when they're assigning headings. The reason for this, the airspace being the way it is here, usable airspace, is number one, Boeing Field over here, and the rule that the FAA is using is that an aircraft departing must be diverging 30 degrees from the missed approach course. So the missed approach course off of Boeing Field over here is to the northwest on about a 310 heading. So if you'd have to turn at least to a 280 degree heading here to diverge from the missed approach course at Boeing Field. That is the rule that they're using. Now, it is debatable whether that is being applied exactly correct. I think if I was within the FAA, I could very easily have that debate. Outside of the FAA, if that's the way they choose to interpret it, that's kind of the way, it's their call. That's their rule. That's the way they interpret it. They say, okay, this is how we're going to use this rule. Most of the time with FAA, with the controller's Bible is what we call, it's 7110.65 is the order. You operate in the gray area a lot in that order because a lot of it is human intuition on what the correct response to any given situation is. And that's what the controllers are tasked with to ensure safety and separation of aircraft. So in the application of some of these rules, sometimes there's debate on whether or not that's the correct application of the rule. As it's been relayed to me, that's how they're interpreting the use of the rule here. The other piece down here, this 210, is a different rule which says aircraft landing this way and departures have to be separated by 45 degrees from the reciprocal of the final approach course. So that means that these aircraft can turn to about a 210 heading because these guys are landing on the 3-4s, and that gives you at least 45 degrees divergence. If it's any further south than that, it would be considered opposite direction. Separation wouldn't exist according to the rules. So that gives you the resultant airspace into which aircraft can be turned. I do think if it is determined that, yes, in fact, they can continue to turn these aircraft out, one of the things that there is a discussion about is how to utilize that airspace for the benefit of the city, the best benefit of the city, or the least disbenefit of the city. So, you know, could you use a specific heading that you all decide that that would be beneficial, or could you use multiple headings within that space to disperse the noise so that the same people aren't experiencing it the same day? There's some options to be talked about there. The other piece that I wanted to talk about specifically was, have you all heard the term .41 alpha process? Okay, so the .41 alpha process used to be termed the 18-step process. Is the process that the FAA uses to implement new procedures, and it is done in a collaborative manner with the airport, the FAA, the air traffic controllers, the airlines, and now sometimes cities are involved in it, depending on exactly the venue and how it's done. They certainly are involved in the FAA's community engagement piece, if not sitting at the table. But the 41 alpha process here was started, I believe it was in 2016, and they were looking at the southbound departures and seeing how they could do something different to increase departure capacity. To do that, they had to examine this yellow box here. This yellow box is considered the current noise track or noise containment area. So today, what has to happen is all the aircraft that depart southbound off of Seattle must remain within this yellow box until they get to the very end of it, or 3,000 feet before they can turn. So today, all the aircraft go all the way down here, no matter which runway they depart. They go down here to this waypoint, all the way down here over Federal Way, before they make any turns. One of these suggestions, and I wouldn't even call it a notional procedure at this point, I think it was just a discussion that was had in the 41 Alpha meetings, working group, was to design a procedure that diverged by a new rule, which is 10 degrees. If you did 15 degrees divergence, it would take it outside of this box before the end of it. If you did 10 degrees, you could stay within this box down to this corner before the aircraft diverged. So, or they could actually diverge within the box, but stay in the box all the way down here to this corner. The idea was to get the aircraft out over the water as soon as possible and keep them over the water for as long as possible. Thereby not flying over your homes, just flying over the water. It was talked about for a while. The advantage to the airport is if the aircraft diverge immediately after departure, they can launch the aircraft quicker. So right now, minimum separation for aircraft that are departing in trail is 3 miles. So they have to all be 3 miles apart. If they're going the same place, they got to be 3 miles, 3 miles, 3 miles. If they all go down to this waypoint before they diverge, that's the closest they can come off of the airport, is 3 miles apart. If they diverge, like in this example here, and it's hard to see, but on this little red line here, if they diverge, then they only have to be 1 mile apart when they come off the airport. So basically, it's runway separation. When the first aircraft takes off, the second aircraft can roll immediately. They don't do that today because they can't. They can't get the appropriate amount of separation. What has to happen today, pretty much, is the first aircraft has to cross the end of the runway before the second aircraft rolls. The exception to that, I will say, is prop aircraft, because a prop aircraft can be turned out. The jets cannot. So that's the exception. One thing you'll find out in the FAA, there's an exception to every rule, and that's the exception here. So prop aircraft can be turned out, and that's where you get the Burien turnout piece. But the jets, they got to go out that noise track. So I guess my question or food for thought to you all is, if the airport came back and they decided that they were going to reinitialize the 41 Alpha program, which has been paused, shelved. I would hate to say canceled, but at least at the very minimum postponed due to budget considerations. If it was to revitalize themselves and it came out, do you all see an advantage to something like this? Do you see an advantage to getting the aircraft out over the water sooner? And if so, how? How would you want to do that? According to the rules, if you can see this little arrow here, the end of that arrow is about a mile off the departure end of the runway. That's the soonest an aircraft could turn, according to the rules. So once they get out there a mile off the departure end, is there some place between there and down around here that would be more advantageous for those aircraft to turn out over the water? That's something that has to be decided politically with you all. So one of the things that we can do is we can explain the rules to you guys and how they're applied and what your options are, but we're not going to pick what we think you should do. We're going to say, this is the parameters within which you can choose. Tell us what you want, and then we can advocate for that. So I think in any situation that is a capacity enhancement for the airport, it does the one thing that I think most of you guys don't like is increases the number of flights possible. So the airport is always looking to enhance capacity. You know that. How many here have heard the term wake recat? Okay, so wake recat. We had a little bit of a discussion on that earlier today. Wake recat, according to the FAA, is a separation standard change. A change to separation standards, according to today's rule, does not require environmental review. Although it would have the effect of potentially increasing capacity at the airport. One of the things that came to mind earlier when we were talking about this a little bit was to check the airline schedules to see if after wake recat is fully implemented, if the airlines change their schedules and add flights. That would be interesting to see if that actually happens. The issue, I think, here is that the runway separation, the distance between the runway center lines is such that you cannot run what they call independent simultaneous approaches. So independent simultaneous approaches can only be run to runways, a new rule, that are spaced 3,600 feet or further apart. There's some special rules for runways that are separated by 3,000 feet with an offset final. You don't have that here. Your runways, your two outside runways are separated by 2,500 feet. So the only time you can do simultaneous operations, simultaneous arrival operations to those runways is in visual conditions where aircraft can see each other. If they can see each other, they're spaced far enough apart that they can do simultaneous approaches and they don't have to worry about the other big booger, which is wake turbulence. Wake turbulence is produced by larger aircraft. It's wingtip vortices that can upset an aircraft that's following them. So 2,500 feet is the magic number for spacing between the runways that allows simultaneous approaches in visual conditions. So one aircraft is on the final, another aircraft's coming in. This airplane has to see this airplane, acknowledge it, and be told to maintain visual separation from that airplane, and then they can come in and join the final next to them. And then they can go both proceed and land. When the weather is down and crappy, you can't do it. You have to do what they call dependent simultaneous approaches, which is, they say simultaneous, it's because they're running the two runways, but the closest they can do it is a stagger. They can stagger the aircraft to the outboard runways. That center runway, in VMC conditions, is being used more and more for departures. The drawback with that is that some of the longer, heavier overseas flight, they still need 1/6 left, the longest runway for departures. So what happens is they don't get maximum amount of efficiency out of the airport just due to the rules and the runway spacing, they can't simultaneously depart the center runway and 1/6 left. Generally speaking, for simultaneous same direction operations, you need 700 feet between runway center lines. You have that here. I believe those are at least 700 feet apart. I don't know exactly the number. But if there's two large aircraft like two 737s, they could take off simultaneously in visual conditions and then diverge. But they would have to diverge immediately after departures, like what I was talking about earlier here, which they can't do today. The things they can do is they can do simultaneous departures with a jet and a prop and turn the prop out, which probably happens quite a bit. So the mixed use of those runways is a limiting factor on the capacity of the airport. It's just the runway configuration is not conducive to simultaneous approaches all the time in all weather conditions. So there's a lot of other separation rules that come into play. The one thing that you all probably do know is that the furthest west runway is generally used for arrivals. They very, very seldom use that runway for departures unless another runway is closed. But generally speaking, that's an arrival-only runway. We talked about a runway use plan. That would have to be something that would be done voluntarily, and it would have to be something that we advocated for, helped you advocate for, and try to amend their current procedures for the use of those runways. There can be things done like choosing the direction of takeoff on certain days or certain weeks. Some of that is constrained by wind. The rule today, generally speaking, aircraft take off into the wind or as close to into the wind as they can. The FAA considers it a calm wind runway when it's less than 5 knots of wind. So if it's less than 5 knots of wind, they can take off any direction they want to. I'm not aware if they have a designated calm wind runway here or not. I would suspect it's probably a south operation, if I was a guessing man. But I don't know that to be a fact. But, yeah. So yeah, good guess, huh? So I think one of the things that is a possibility is to come up with a plan that would allow, sharing the wealth, basically. Sometimes they're departing north, sometimes they're departing south. Of course, departures are louder than arrivals, generally speaking. So if you can have them depart equally north and south, kind of try to get as close to a 50-50 mix as you can, that kind of shares the wealth on noise. Not a total solution to the problem, but it's a step in the right direction. The other thing that we've heard the word several times tonight is curfew. I'll let Jason talk to this because he's a lot more knowledgeable than I am. But just for my limited knowledge, because this is more of an airport thing, the actual airports that have quote-unquote curfews today were grandfathered in. To try to get an official formal curfew is horrendously hard and costs a lot of money and takes an awful lot of time. That's something that you guys would have to decide if you wanted to pursue. To our knowledge, there may have been one airport, what is it, Jason, since 1990, 80, that got approved, but virtually anybody else that's tried it has been denied. So I'll let him talk about that here in just a second. But the reason I bring it up is I think we had a discussion tonight about the noise limitation from midnight to 5 a.m. I think, if we were able to help facilitate better communication and collaboration with the airport and the FAA, and if we could get that expanded to, say, even 11 to 6, I'd call that a win. So, I think what we would look for is things like that we can help you advocate for. Now, something like that would still be a voluntary program, and we have connections within the FAA that we can talk to. We have connections within the airlines that we can talk to, and maybe help facilitate, cooperation in that area. Now, it's not, obviously not a guarantee or anything, but that's just an idea or a suggestion of one area that we may be able to help facilitate an answer for. So that's just a few ideas that I've heard over the last 9 hours now. So it's way past my bedtime. I'm from Atlanta, so you have to forgive me there. But if you have any other questions or issues or anything you want to talk about, reference this or anything else, just go ahead and toss it out.
So I want to go to your maps.
Yes, ma'am?
Because the maps, oh, I'm sorry. He was looking at me, so that's why I went.
Okay, but I'll go ahead and give you the floor, but it looked like, but anyway, yeah, let's do it a step at a time.
So, but to clarify your maps, because you seem to have it in a box, and that's not our life. Our life is, oops, you took away my map, your map.
Your life just disappeared.
My life is disappearing under these planes. But you have it so it looks like they're turning out over Normandy Park. They're not. They're turning out over the marina. We're very familiar with the props, the Q400s.
You mean this down here?
No, it's further down over our marina. You're missing lines. You're missing actual, if you go to your arrow, the end point of the runway, and you head east, they turn there.
East?
Yes, they turn now over, they turn east. It's right at takeoff, they're turning. If you go to your line again and then go west, they're turning.
Okay.
So we're very familiar with the.
And this is I should have said, that is a north operation when they're departing to the north and they turn west to that 250 heading.
Okay, so when I'm talking when they're departing to the south.
Okay.
So they are turning already.
Sure.
They're turning over, it's not your hard yellow line, but it's further down over our marina, over our East Hill, if you will, or the Kent, or the North Hill. But we are experiencing the wake recat, the frequency of getting the turboprops, as you called them, or the Q400s out of the way. So it's a prop jet. So we are already experiencing that.
Right, so the props turn out, the jet goes straight.
Exactly.
Props turn out, the jet goes straight.
And so we are already experiencing the frequency.
Yes, ma'am.
And I don't think that anybody in this room wants another community to experience that. We need to have a conversation about how we are going to manage some sort of relief from this. And because Des Moines is long and straight, basically nobody will get relief. Nobody. So there's really no plan to move the flights over another community, because I would never want to inflict harm on my neighbor. So those are the type of conversations that I hope we can have with you, not negotiating a turn over my neighbor, but how we're going to manage the growth when we are so confined.
Well, and that's one of the beauties of having the 4 cities involved, because you can have those kinds of conversations for the betterment of all. So if there is, I'm not saying there is, and I'm not saying there's not, but I'm saying if there is something that all of you can collaboratively agree on and advocate for together procedurally, I think you have a great lobby.
Recognize Deputy Mayor Pennington.
Okay, so, I realize you did this primarily for the Des Moines area, but the box, what's the yellow lines, what would they look like north for our friends that are here from Burien and some of the other cities?
So there is a box north. I don't have that airspace depicted, but I will say this. These red lines are the current departure lines that the aircraft take, the jet aircraft take. The jet aircraft do not deviate off those lines until this intersection. From there, they do various things. These are just a couple of the departures that they have. Like, for instance, northbound departures, a lot of times they'll come out over here over the bay, the sound, and then go to the north. This one is a westbound departure route, but they come out here and they turn to the northwest and they come out and they go over there. There's a new departure procedure that they were using. They actually named it the Atomi, which was after this intersection right here, that was going to be used at night that they haven't implemented. That was part of that .41 alpha thing that came out, went north, and they climbed out to the north, and then they turned east at night. It was a nighttime only procedure that they were proposing. But for today, the aircraft that depart northbound, like I said, I don't have the box because no turnouts for jets were proposed to the north. For whatever reason, they just weren't. But these are the tracks that they take to this Worrell intersection. So that's what they all go on.
So the other question I have, and it's more for our Burien friends in North Highline, what does Boeing, or not Boeing Field, but King County Airport, do they utilize these same turnouts, and are they receiving impacts from King County Airport over what's the White Center Burien area? And do they do the same turnouts that SeaTac does? Are they getting hit by two different airports?
Is that for me?
Yeah.
I am not familiar with King County Airport.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Okay, go to Councilman Betting.
I'm just wondering if they changed the trajectory at which they landed and took off, if it would affect less people. I've flown into Oakland once before, and it's like the plane drops out of the sky, and then when they're climbing, it's like they're coming straight up. And yeah, so is the slope, so to speak, changing that? Is that going to change? And
So-
could we get our airport to do that?
So we had a discussion about that yesterday. There is, today, on the ILS, is the instrument landing system, I guess is 2.7, what'd you say, 2.75 degrees. Standard across the country right now is 3 degrees. Generally speaking, in my experience, that they do not go higher than a 3-degree glide slope specifically for noise. They will do it for terrain, but not for noise. But it is reasonable to expect that they go to a 3-degree glide slope for arrivals for aircraft coming in basically to all runways. One of the things that we talked about the other day was in greener skies, they implemented some, they call them RNP, RNAV approaches that are required. It stands for Required Navigational Performance. And the RMP arrivals are very precise arrivals, and all of those are set up on a 3-degree glide path. So one of the things that they can do is, as more aircraft get equipped to fly those procedures, and as the rules change to allow more aircraft to fly those procedures, they can transition to those and fly those more without having to go out and physically change a glide slope, republish procedures and stuff like that. So there are some things in the near term that could possibly be negotiated with the FAA to assign those approaches as often as possible. That would, it raises the glide path a 1/4 degree. I'm not sure the amount of impact that would have, but it's better than nothing. So on departures, they have they have 2 standard departure procedures, an NADP1 and NADP2. They're noise abatement departure procedures. The NADP1, generally speaking, is a steeper climb early that gets them higher faster over the ground. NADP2 is more of a rate of climb that gets them higher over time. There's debates on which one is better for a given community. What happens with NADP2 is actually the most generally accepted departure procedure that they fly, noise abatement departure procedure that they fly. They have some special procedures, again, that were grandfathered, such as John Wayne Airport, but this one, at virtually all the other airports, NADP2 is a standard, which what they do is when they take off, they climb to a specified altitude, like 1,000 or 1,200 feet or so, and then they cut back the power so that they're quieter and they gain altitude a little bit slower over a distance, but they don't have as much thrust. They're not generating as much noise from the airframe itself. The engines aren't as loud, and that helps mitigate noise on the ground. NADP 1, they use a higher power setting. Larry can correct me if I'm wrong. They use a higher power setting, and they get up higher faster, but generally speaking, that tends to cause louder noise in close to the airport, which is where y'all are. So there would be a debate, I think, as to which one would be better, but I think generally speaking, NADP 2 is in use pretty much as a standard now.
Councilman Buxton?
So, thank you. Thanks, Rob. Thank you. Emily, you talked about earlier having several successes across the country. And so I just wanted to check, are there any successes that you've had that are not these options that we've been presented tonight? Can you talk maybe, can you summarize it? Are there some successes that you see possibly that we could be successful with here? And are they just these things here?
So that's a really good question. So I think the one main thing, sort of that I hear that is true, and that you may have heard it if you're at different meetings, is if you've seen one airport, you've seen one airport. The things that are, the options that are available in every scenario or in every airport are different. So what could work somewhere could be very detrimental somewhere else. What I would say in terms of the success that I'm sort of building on or talking about is really in that the identifying what those options are. And I don't think this is an exhaustive list. I think this is just our perceptions from today, and we need to go back and really look at things that have been discussed, spend more time on it. But the success that I can really capture and say that I think could be emulated here or repeated here is really that once there are some solutions or some options, that connection, that speaking their language, all of the things that we've been able to provide in other cities, that's where we really had measurable successes. And I mean, I can give you specific examples. I can almost guarantee you that the actual solution would not be meaningful here. But just as general examples, just an awareness, which you guys already are way above, you're way beyond that, kind of cultivating that awareness of sort of what's coming down the pike, and having people on the ground that speak the language of the airport and the FAA, and that you can utilize, that you can use as support in formal processes and then in meetings behind the scenes, and even just learning from other cities about kind of what and through us or through kind of what my work with them over the years, learning what is possible theoretically and what can be discussed and what different venues of what works at the proverbial START meeting in Minneapolis or in Atlanta, which Jim can talk about, or in Baltimore, what has worked elsewhere. So it's more theoretical than it is actually these options, but I can see it being replicated here very easily, that same sort of formula of success. If that makes sense.
One of the examples that we gave earlier today was one of our other clients is Laguna Beach, and we were able to go into a situation there where they were involved in a lawsuit against the FAA for the implementation of new routings in Southern California TRACON airspace. And it was with departures out of John Wayne to the south and that turned back east, that departed over the water and then came back over the land and normally above 10,000 feet. But what was happening was the aircraft were shortcutting that route and flying over the city. When we went in, they were in litigation, and we asked them to give us a crack at negotiating a settlement agreement for them. We were able to discuss with the FAA options and basically ask them to keep the aircraft on that existing route that they had designed as much as possible. Their retort basically was, well, we have to be able to turn the aircraft for spacing, for separation, for weather, for restricted airspace, and just a litany of reasons why they have to turn airplanes. My response to them, and I was talking to one of their air traffic controllers, was, as well you should. And he was taken aback, really didn't even know how to respond because I agreed with it, right? But then I said, but here's my ask is, if you don't have to, don't. And they basically chewed on that for a little while, and they said, well, I think we could agree to do that on a voluntary basis, right? Big thing, the voluntary basis, right? So we entered into a settlement agreement with them that memorialized that said, to the maximum extent possible, they'll stay on the route. And today we're having about an 85 to 87% compliance rate. And I've told the city that about 90% is the best you can ever expect, because at 10% of the time they're going to have to turn the airplanes for something. But, you know, I think that was successful. In addition to that, there's another arrival route that is designed to go right over the city. And they gave us the option to go in and suggest alternative designs for them, which we're in the process of doing right now. So down the road, there was 5 or 6 other cities that had lawsuits filed against the FAA. All of those lawsuits were dismissed, and the only community that got anything was Laguna Beach, because we negotiated a settlement agreement with them. So specifically, does that type of situation apply to you guys here? No. But the thing that's relevant is the fact that if you can get to the right people, if you can talk to the people that can actually make a decision, you can get in there and get something done. Now, whether that is through START, we've heard that, shall we say, there's been varying levels of success with START or failure. You know, there's some other avenues that we'll explore. One of the processes that we have talked about is to have the 4 cities make a list of all the things that they have asked for START, and give it to us. And let us evaluate that list and parse it and categorize it by, is this reasonably implementable or is it not, number 1. Number 2, if it is reasonably implementable, is it easy, you know, low-hanging fruit? Is it midterm, is it long-term type implementation? And if we categorize those out, then we give that list back to y'all with, you know, our opinion as to, you know, whether or not it's implementable and what the likelihood of implementation is and what the difficulty of implementation is as we look at it. And then it gives you guys the chance to go back through and say, okay, of these things that are reasonably implementable, which ones are the most important to us? And then once we have that, then we have the basis to advocate on your behalf going forward. And then we can make a plan as to how to get from A to Z and who we need to talk to, what resources we need. And then, you know, and you all have, you know, economic and political decisions to make at that point. So, you know, it'll be a process, but, you know, we think that that's a good beginning.
Councilman, Steve Edmondson.
Well, first, I thanked you before for being here. I thank you again for being here. It is, I am convinced there are few firms and individuals with this level of expertise in the United States who are willing to sort of work and align with communities as consultants versus, let's say, the industry, because most of the big paychecks are written by industry to consultants in this field, and so we appreciate that and the work. So thank you again. Here's what's troubling me about the discussion that we're having, and I just want to help parse through this, is that I feel like we're playing on the playing field that exists, or in a sense, in the military, we'd say we're fighting the battle that was the last war, and we're using our lessons learned from that prior experience and trying to apply them to the present. In many cases, that makes sense. You know, it used to be, and I'm just trying to catch up to you guys, I've only been doing this for a couple of years, but it used to be, if I look at the old science, they called it annoyance science. You know, it was like, who's annoyed by this and who's not annoyed? And, you know, Sheila's annoyed and I'm not, and, you know, but it's okay, we'll try to figure out how to help you, and I'm not. But what's happened in the last 6 months alone is that all of that thinking, all of those old battles, all of that old science seems to be getting kicked to the curb. On noise, we have the World Health Organization environmental noise guidelines out of Europe. And they looked at everything from 2009 to the present. And we're not at this meeting so far talking about, well, playing on that playing field is not addressing the fact that we're being told that 45 decibels and above is hurting us. So deciding where to make a micro change on where an airport would go because 4 cities think there might be a slight improvement doesn't seem to be addressing the core problem, number one. Number two is on emissions and pollution, what we're learning on ultrafine particles, and the studies are underway at the University of Washington, leading state of the art, but they're going to be going out all over, coming in from all over the country. They're all coming in one way, right? We're never going to be told when we listen to the radio in the morning one day that it turns out ultrafine particles are good for us and we should have more. We know that the science is going to say it's bad for us, here's how it's bad for us, and it's worse than we thought. They're just all going to come in, and that's how they're coming in, I think, right? So the city of Des Moines and the city of Burien have already passed resolutions and sent letters to the Port of Seattle and said, asked for this, not to buy the science, but wait. Could we just take a breath? Could we just slow down? Could we just wait to start the SAMP and this expansive growth that we have talked about until at least we're more sure, and if we're more sure that it's hurting us, can we at least not play on that playing field, but sort of understand what we have to do to protect the health and safety of our citizens? I feel like if we're not talking about that, we're not advocating on behalf of the health of our humans and the environment. And if we're not leading with that, that's troubling to me as a citizen. If you feel I'm right, if you feel this is right, like I'm speaking truth here, we have Mr. Kaplan, our former mayor and council member for 16 years, who now works for the Port of Seattle and is essentially kind of the tip of the sword on these issues for expansion. If you think I'm right, what would you tell Mr. Kaplan, who's taking notes in the audience for the Port of Seattle tonight? What would you tell him is the right thing to do? Should we be holding off and waiting till we have this science for 6 months or a year or 2 years, if that's what it takes, to be sure? Or should we go ahead on that playing field no matter what and just let this expansion go forward? What's your thought on that?
Well, I think if I'm hearing you, is that, that you want to be addressing the larger, more global issues of what is causing the harmful impacts of airport noise on citizens. Is that, am I capturing that right?
Not just me, but our cities have passed resolutions.
Not just you, but what you're capturing here. So I think that is important, but, bar none. It's second to none, it's critical, right? I think that they have to be, I think that those are such long processes that it is not harmful or wrong or not speaking the truth to be putting your flag down, as you were saying, that these are things that are important and that we want to address. But I think that that the reality is that those playing fields are not going to change for a very long time in terms of noise impact, in terms of the 2030 study, in terms of the World Health Organization's, their assessment might put some pressure on on the United States, and we operate very differently than Europe in terms of our noise mitigation, in terms of everything. But that will be an extremely long process. And so I think that it's vital to capture and vital to make sure that, it's a city's decision, and, you said we've already put that marker down. But if there's going to be meaningful change in a meaningful time frame, we're working with this playing deck. And I think that if you can not have to kind of cry uncle and say, okay, this is the deck, this is the hand we're dealt, but realize that in the interim, you've got to work within that so that you can make some meaningful changes while still advocating long term. And that's something that, I think I talk about this a lot in my work, is the top-down, bottom-up approach. The top-down approach is where that stuff is going to have to come from, where, the World Health Organization, they're going to have to make, our environmental policy and FAA policy kind of makers kind of shrink and be like, ooh, we got to catch up to this and put some pressure on. It's going to be national, federal policy, and it's going to be, in my opinion, take a great deal of pressure, national pressure. And I think that's a very slow process. The federal government is, moves very slowly. I don't think that it's a throwaway, that what you're saying. I don't think that we should ignore it or say that this is fair or anything like that, but I do think that there is, you can make some simultaneous progress with this current playing field while still advocating for that big long-term change. And doing both, from the top down and the bottom up, if you're advocating from both those angles. Does that make sense or address?
Can I ask a follow-up? Okay. It does make perfect sense, and I think there is absolute truth in that. But I also think there are absolute opportunities in the very short run to use those tools. And I'll give you an example. My understanding of the law is federal dollars are very wrapped up in federal grant assurances and have great limits. So for us to collect federal money and say we want, for example, mitigation, we're going to live with the 65 DNL, right? We're going to live with the contours defined. But my understanding is, for example, non-federal dollars that the Port of Seattle would have available to it through tax levy and otherwise is available for mitigation down to World Health Organization's levels of 45 decibels if we wanted to do it. It's a choice, because there's no restriction on that money. It's absolutely true. I could spend it on marketing, I could spend it on vendors, I could spend it any way I choose to. If I believe that the health and safety of my citizens and I buy science, unless you're suggesting that you have a better report today than the World Health Organization's aggregation since 2009 of all science on this issue, why can't we, as we sit around a table as citizens talking to each other, and Mr. Kaplan's here, and I don't mean to put him on the spot, he doesn't have to respond, but the port is here, and they're listening. And it's so important, I think, for our consultants to be able to turn to them and say, hey, port, we believe the World Health Organization is correct. We believe we have to mitigate now. We believe that there's a way for you to spend those dollars. There's no science that's saying they're wrong. Let's have that discussion, because that's not we don't have to change the needle at the federal level to do that. We don't have to do any of the things you just said. That's a now. We could do that now.
Yes, I think you're right. And my only response to that is basically that is a prioritization that
Bingo.
you guys will have to do. Because, if that, like I said, we had the green short-term low-hanging fruit, the yellow and the red, the longer time things, or the things that are not implementable, that may fall into kind of the red that's like, yeah, there's a 10% chance that you're going to get that done. It's going to cost millions of dollars, but it's really, really, really important to us, and we want to do it. If that is the priority that you have, and that's the priority that's assigned to us, I think we can help. My expertise, nor Jason's, nor Emily's, is in particulate matter. We really don't know a lot about that. We do have a partner that has some background in that. Unfortunately, he has to act in an advisory capacity now because he works for a major corporation in New York. So he's now a senior advisor to us. So some of that information that we can ask him some questions and stuff, but he can't come to meetings, he can't be involved in day-to-day operations. But we do have access to him and to his advice to whom else we can talk to about those things. So if we don't know an answer, number one, I'm not gonna tell you I do when I don't. And number two, if we don't know an answer, we'll go find it for you. So, the other piece about the noise, that's our niche, that's our expertise. So yes, we're gonna try to do what we can based on the prioritization that you all give us to address the issues that you want. And it's just a matter of resources and priority.
Thank you this is very helpful, and as I did in the last meeting, took too much time, so I'm done.
No, you're not. I'm not going to take you off just yet. Each three of you represent kind of a different angle on this topic, and I think we'd be interested in hearing if you had anything you wanted to bring forward.
Thank you for drawing him out.
From your side of things.
So we spent the last day and a half working on this expanded look at opportunities, and we haven't really dove into the specifics. So if you're asking about sort of the low-hanging fruit kinds of things, is that?
Well, Mr. Edmondson covered, the low-hanging fruit and the very high fruit. And we've heard from, the air traffic kind of management side, the legal side, and my understanding is your expertise leads to that of more of a port entity, correct?
Yeah.
Airport. So if you think about what's been said and discussed here, just your take on where you think we might find the win, where you think, the perspective could be. I know you're not going to be knowledgeable about how every airport's thinking, but at least you're there and having some experience in how the behavior typically is towards each of these arguments where you think we might have reasonable success, where you think we might not.
Okay, yeah. Well, we've talked a little bit about the Part 150 study, which was completed in 2014. So right off the top of my head, that was one of the areas that I would look at first to say, and we actually started looking at that, but we haven't dug very deep into it. But what of the approved recommendations, because those would have been vetted through the community, through the airport and FAA, and you send the recommendations to the FAA and it comes back in a record of approval. So going through those recommendations and figuring out what was approved, and then what's the status. So that included things, there was noise abatement in there, there's sound insulation, things like that. So that would be my first step as the airport group guy of the group, is looking at the existing Part 150 and what has been done, what hasn't, and then reaching out to the airport and checking out why. So are these in process, are they going to be? And then the question came up in our discussions earlier today about updating the Part 150, and we heard that they wanted to wait, at least I think what I heard was they wanted to wait till after the SAMP was complete, which makes sense for a number of reasons. You could kind of argue either way, but for a number of reasons, or for whatever their reason, they're waiting. But that would be my next step, would be to recommend through the start that they revisit the updating of the Part 150, because that's really for a noise abatement and mitigation. If you want to solve the noise issues, not the air quality and some of the other stuff we've talked about, Part 150 is the right tool for it. That's what it's there for. And that also includes and requires community involvement, so sort of a START type committee would be required under the Part 150 process, where you'd get the cities involved, the residents involved, the airport, the airlines and air traffic at the table, going through some of these procedures. And that would include management type stuff, like, if there's issues with the START as a group, as a committee, if that tool isn't working well for you, that would be something that you could talk about in the guise of Part 150 under the management practices. Some of the stuff Jim talked about, the operational procedures and flight paths and departure profiles, all of that is fair game in Part 150. And then, of course, you've got the sound insulation for communities that have noise exposure that's non-compatible, so above 65 DNL or above would all be options in there. But from my perspective, Part 150 is really the best tool for all this, because that's what it's designed for, and that would open up federal dollars to some of these projects that could come out of that.
Our big challenge is that we've had very limited success with the Part 150. So I guess what I would hope for, and I don't want to speak for everybody else here, but I would hope that the input, if we did end up working in the 150, would help us figure out a way to be more successful with that, with the outcome of that. Thanks for weighing in. So next one I saw was Councilmember Mahoney, then I'll go to Councilmember Bangs, Sheila Brush, and Steve Edmondson.
Thank you, Mayor. I was very interested in your perspective from the FAA, the noise track, the yellow box. My thought was that's a lot bigger than the contour that surrounds the airport where the mitigation has occurred. And something that Mr. Edmondson said as well, have you ever heard of anybody being able to use that? Because it seems like that's what the FAA uses as their noise box, but yet the contour is much smaller. The difference is kind of outstanding. And is there a way to, we use you as far as expanding that contour? And I think in the new science and some of the studies with the particulate, is there a way to bundle the two? And probably one doesn't fit under the 150, but is there a way? Has it ever been tried anywhere?
So part of it is the understanding of what that box represents and why it is where it is and why it's as big as it is. So there are aircraft, a number of aircraft that still depart off of this airport on headings. Headings are affected by the wind. So the box is oversized because of wind drift. That way it gives them a fighting chance of staying within that box. Now, if they transition to RNAV off the ground procedures for all aircraft that are departing out of there, the tracks become much narrower, and they will be more representative of the noise contours as they actually are. So I think it's apples and oranges, really. I don't think one really, I think one has to do with the other, but it's not. In other words, by changing the dimensions of that box, you're not changing the requirements for any kind of mitigation. It's just a target for the FAA to shoot for, to stay within.
Now, just to add to that, the genesis of the I think the same graphics. It's the Fly Quiet program for SeaTac has very similar boxes, and my understanding, and I haven't dived into this, it's on my to-do list, but that came out of a Part 150. And it was the Fly Quiet program that was developed, I guess, back in the 90s with community input. So my guess is, based on what airports typically do, they work with, through the Part 150 study, you identify what area would be the least impacted, probably back then in terms of population. So if the population density was the least right there, or they could keep it, if they found that if they kept the aircraft as precisely along that runway heading as possible, it would minimize the number exposed to the higher decibel levels. That's how they came about. So I guess the point is that those were created as a noise tool. So if they're no longer working, the community could bring that back to the noise office and say, hey, maybe this needs to be looked at again. And because some of the things that Jim talked about, like a turn earlier than, they can't right now turn out of that box, because the noise program, the Fly Quiet program, says they can't. So the FAA is saying, okay, fine, we'll comply with that. So if you all, and working through the airport, came up with, or if you come up with a better solution, maybe an early turn gets them right over the water right away, and you do want them to turn out early. But right now, the FAA won't turn them early because they're complying with the Fly Quiet program, which is meant to minimize noise for the community.
Yeah, I would say that it just expanding the contour for other people to get mitigation would be more what I'm after. But thank you. My next question is, so the curfew thing, and I heard the difficulty of getting something that's basically mandatory, or the law that they have to follow, that's been solely voluntary. Obviously, many of us would love to see a quiet window between 12 and 5. Nobody likes the cargo plane at 2:30 or 3 in the morning. Is there, or has there ever been any ways that you've negotiated, particularly type of aircraft, particularly the older ones or the cargo planes that have been retrofitted, which are much noisier in a lot of cases, where they are curfewed in some kind of agreement to say certain daylight hours instead of almost any time? Have you ever had any exposure to that type of thing?
At an airport that we implemented a voluntary, which I know everybody hates, but they call it a voluntary curfew. Some airports call it a voluntary restraint from flying. And at that airport, the voluntary curfew began at 6 a.m. And we had one large cargo carrier that came in with 3 flights. One of them came in, it was like 5:30, 5:45, and 6:15 or something. And through negotiation, we got one of the aircraft arrivals out of that quiet window. The other one, they had to bring it in at like 10 minutes to 6, right before the end of the voluntary curfew. So, but again, like Jim said, it's voluntary, but I mean, you can work with the operators. You just have to keep in mind that, at least in the case of the airport I was working with, the arrival schedules are based on a logistical change. So they told us, well, if that last aircraft came in at 6 or later, the offloading and the trucking that goes out through the metro area wouldn't make it to the destinations in time, and blah, blah, blah. So we were able to negotiate some improvements, but not as much as we wanted.
But it's possible is what
It's possible.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Banks?
Well, we've certainly heard a lot, and I appreciate that, and I know that quite a few committees have been working on this, and quite a few cities have been as well. And I think my question is more along the line of moving forward. I mean, I'm hearing a lot of ideas. I'm hearing some things that are sound good. I know that we're dealing with 4 or 5 entities that may not come to the table. 3 might come, 2 might come. The most important one typically doesn't. So what do we do now moving forward as a city? I know we're in collaboration with the other cities, but, you know, we got to move somewhere, move this forward. And I guess, and I know, you know, listen, the gyration of politics kills you, right? The gyration of dealing with organizations kill you. But where can we go now to make some step forward? And I'm hearing all the things you've done in smaller communities and smaller airports. I'm assuming Laguna's small. I don't know. But we're, you know, we've got a fairly large airport here. We've got 31,000 people. We've got Federal Way. We've got Beering. We've got, well, okay, SeaTac. So, but we've got some serious issues. What are we going to do? I've not heard that, and I'm sorry, I haven't been involved in a lot of this for many reasons, one in particular, but now I want to know, what can we do as a council or cities moving forward? Because we could do this all day long.
So, you know, appreciate the question, right? And the reason we're sitting here at this table is to find answers to that question. And I think where we've gotten to, there's a lot of pieces to this. And I worked in another community that had an urban airport that expanded a runway. And I was involved in that process, right? Both the environmental and the economic benefit side. And so I think it's fair to say, and with all due respect to everybody in the room, that these 3 individuals bring more knowledge than probably everyone else in the room has. So I think that's a step forward. I think that the 4 cities, Burien and SeaTac and Normandy Park and ourselves, you know, it was a very positive dynamic to engage these consultants in helping us review impacts that are going to affect us. And so I think what we're trying to do is both work with the other cities, but break it down for Des Moines. You've heard a number of things. We talked a lot about runway usage. We talked about the nighttime flights. We talked about some of we've talked about glide slope. We've talked about what the actual flight patterns are. And there's a lot of other things that can be discussed that haven't yet been discussed. So the next steps are pretty specific. One is to develop with the consultants, and I think that you know, the more that we spend time with them and the commitment of the city to data and science-based responses, that I think it's safe to say that we will intend to engage these consultants for our city in addition to their role in the ILA for the SAMP response. And I think the next step is to work with them through the Aviation Advisory Committee especially, and council's input, to identify what Jim was talking about. What's the short term, what's the medium term, what's the long term, what's the likelihood, and to review sort of almost like a matrix or something of the different options, and then where do we focus? Because one of the reasons that I think I hear a level of frustration in what you're saying, and I think that we all share, is that such a universe of complexity, where do you pick it apart? And it's made more difficult by the fact that the airport and port, with all due respect, in many people's view, have not always been transparent as to what the options are. And I think now, finally, with the consultants, I feel confident that we'll finally know what question to ask based on specific science review when we're told you can't do that. Well, why not? What about? And then, because that usually ends the conversation. I know, Sheila, you've been on the START committee. Steve, you've been to a number of the meetings, has so many people in the audience. And I think there's a level of frustration when we say, well, why can't we do that? Well, because, you know, and it used to, I mean, you know, with all due respect to the port trying to create a community-based engagement, right? It's still, I mean, they win because they know more than we do. And what's a little scary is they ask us, what do we want them to do? No, we want them to tell us what they can do. So the thing gets reversed. It's a little surrealistic. But I think finally, I'm pretty hopeful that for the first time since I've been in Des Moines, I think, we have the tools to understand what our fate looks like based on different options. So I think that's the next steps, and to apprise council of that as we go forward.
Well, I'd also say that there's a multitude of levels of engagement, and augmenting our ability to participate in the conversation with the talent and the background of these individuals really gives us the advantage. Jim cited earlier how he was given all these reasons, and he said, well, yeah, you should. Oh, he understands what I do. But now he's going to come back with an alternative that could work and help provide some relief here. I think I've been through the ACC and everything else, and I think that this is the approach that we're going to have to take. Now, it may lead to something different in the long run, but I think this is the right approach at this. And to be honest with you, I don't think it's been tried here very well, if at all. So with that, next person I have is Sheila Brush.
So I wanted to talk about the current bills pending in Congress and get your feedback, because we have Congressman Lynch's bill, which is 976. I think it's an important bill because he will have the academies of science and medicine, which is probably the only non-stakeholder group. As you know, the FAA tends to use Harvard. The downside I see in them always doing the FAA study is the FAA grants Harvard a lot of money. And so you have a study that is currently done by the FAA and somehow sat in the can for 2 years, and they're not releasing it, and that's the study on noise. But besides Lynch's bill, you have Mang's bill, which is 3001, Congresswoman Mang's bill, and then you have our own Congressman Adam Smith, who has an assortment, one being 23152. You have the Communities Act. He also has another one, which is really important, on the a secondary noise insulation package, which will revisit homeowners that have gotten shoddy work, shoddy windows, and now moldy, shoddy insulation, maybe upgrade it to include HEPA filters. You also have the Communities Acts, and you have the particle emissions. And so where does your point of view on these pending bills?
So, on the National Academy of Sciences bill, Lynch's bill, that's really interesting to me because the ACRP, which is the Airport Cooperative Research Program, has been in existence for decades. It's out of the National Academy of Sciences. It's doing exactly what that bill is proposing. And I think what my biggest concern when I see pieces of legislation come down the pike is that it's been clear that the FAA and Congress aren't talking to each other at headquarter level. And so that's one of the examples, because the intent of that bill is I think, excellent, and I think the outcomes of that bill would be excellent. But, where there could be some recognition of maybe augmenting something that's already going on and sort of supporting that rather than kind of recreating the exact same wheel, is something that I have seen sort of repeated, because I think members of Congress want to be very, very responsive to their constituents and introduce legislation that addresses their concerns. And so I think, to the extent that these bills will be on their own and pass through both the House and the Senate, which is, a long shot in some cases. I would say now that the House has a Democratic majority, it's more likely that these bills, these individual vehicles, will move forward and pass the House, but passing the Senate will be very difficult, because I think, as I would guess that, where I've seen it elsewhere, is that senators are not as engaged on this issue as House members are, because the senators have the whole state. The issues tend to be, more micro, and so the House has been, for instance, there's a Quiet Skies caucus in the House of Representatives. There is not one in the Senate. It's not to say that they're not aware or they're not willing to listen or whatever, but the majority of the bills, or all of the bills, are in the House, and passing the Senate, or Republican Senate, that can be difficult, because as you can imagine, there's a strong lobby, financial and physical lobby on the other side. I can go through the list. I'm pretty familiar with all of the bills that you just mentioned. I think that it's really important, and I'm really encouraged by how much more members of Congress have been willing to create the Quiet Skies Caucus in 2014, introduce legislation, using these platforms to kind of push and use that leverage. And that's something that I do all the time as I work to use the office of, the member of Congress to put pressure in letter writing or in bill introduction and those kind of things. But I think that the likelihood of a lot of those bills moving before being kind of combined into another, like the next FAA reauthorization vehicle, is low. And so, I have thoughts on each of those bills in terms of, some pluses and minuses. But my general impression and point of view is it's really good that the members of Congress are engaged and they want to be introducing this stuff. I think it lends itself to more conversations so that they are more educated. I try to spend a lot of time with staff to be their subject matter experts, because as you can imagine, these folks, and I'm not being negative at all, but a lot of these staffers are 25 to 35. They're very young. They move in and out quickly. And it takes a very long time to have a portfolio of 5 different things and learn about airport noise and be able to effectively work on that. And so that's what I try to do, is be their resource there. And I've given briefings to the Quiet Skies Caucus staff, try and make sure that I'm talking to committee staff a lot. And I think that the most encouraged I've been and the change that I've seen since 2014 is the willingness to be more engaged, ask more questions, and find out what they can do on behalf of their constituents.
So, and my next follow-up question is, I know you don't know very much about ultrafine particulates, but we have a study at our own University of Washington that is funded by the Port of Seattle. And yet, I'm sure you notice under their SAMP, they are choosing to move forward and not wait for the results of their own study. And since you do consulting work also in LA, and there's been the LA study, LAX, there's a huge study going on. Have you seen a trend in airports that are participating in these studies but ignoring any outcome of science, all so that they can push forward with their own greedy expansions? Is this a common thread amongst them, that they say, we'll fund it, we believe in it, but we're going to expand, and we are actually going to ignore the science, regardless of the science? Because what will happen is the science will come out, and as Steve has already articulated, that science will not tell us that we live in a healthy atmosphere. We don't. And so, but it'll be too late because they already expanded. So are you seeing this as a trend in airport expansions coupled with the
I personally have not seen in my work another airport that has funded a study or participated in a study and then moved past it. But I will say, talking about Washington, is you were talking about Harvard, and the FAA. A lot of studies come out of Harvard, Boston study, but that's MIT. So Partner, which was the partnership, I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's the FAA Center of Excellence. So it's the consortium of universities. So it's MIT, Harvard, Boston, and Georgia Tech. One of Jim's colleagues was, one of the founders of Partner, and it's something that we worked on to get federal funding for. That is the consortium of universities across the nation to work on these issues. Penn State. That sunsetted in, I think, 2000, I can't remember when, but the new iteration of that is Ascent. And that is based out of Washington State. And it is looking at renewable fuels, jet fuels, and then it is taken on the noise studies from Partner and the working through the lifespan of those studies. So I just mentioned that as another resource, as another kind of point of interest when you're looking at this stuff, because there is both environmental and noise that are studied out of that consortium of universities. So,
okay. Just one quick last question. Have you ever had a lawsuit, a settlement in a lawsuit with the FAA where the outcome was some kind of reduction in nighttime or a nighttime curfew? I mean, is there any lawsuits that you can describe outside of Phoenix that we all are familiar with where there has been a change?
I don't think that there's, I don't know of any lawsuits that have resulted in, particularly in the nighttime and the curfew issue. There was one 161 study in Naples that I think was I think it was a settlement though out of that lawsuit. It wasn't. It didn't go to court. That's the one that we talk about, the one curfew. But I've never been involved, I was never involved in that. And that's the Phoenix one is really the only lawsuit that I've seen move forward in recent memory that was successful, that the FAA lost.
So,
No, right.
so one question is, we haven't, we've talked about this peripherally, but I'm wondering if you guys could summarize to some degree, both the next gen overall, and then next gen is applicable to SeaTac Airport, to the degree you're aware that aspects of it are implemented, or that there will be implementation, just general, because it's one of those things where there's lots of acronyms, and what we're really trying to do is get all on the same page here in terms of understanding. So if you could just address that, I appreciate it.
Next gen. Oh, gosh. That is a huge animal. There's so many parts to next gen. ADS-B is one of them. That's automatic dependent surveillance broadcast. It's a device that the aircraft are going to have on board the airplane that will enable it to exchange information more efficiently with the ground, giving position data updates every second, so you have better surveillance on aircraft. Once all the aircraft are equipped with that, it would prevent stuff like 777s going down in the ocean and not knowing where it was, that kind of thing. It also enables some technologies that can be used for spacing and sequencing of aircraft, where actually, another step up from the baseline of ADS-B, what they call out is ADS-B in, and that's where you can get information in from another aircraft that you're supposed to be following and that kind of thing. So that's part of next gen. The Autocom, the communications aspect, where they have telecommunications between controllers and aircraft that's automated, that's part of it. There's so much. The aspect of next gen that affects SeaTac the most is the RNAV, is the performance-based navigation aspect. The PBN is what was implemented in greener skies. It's what is used on those departures that I showed you that had the red tracks off of the airport. That's a procedure known as RNAV off the ground, which means that the aircraft can engage either on the ground or very shortly after leaving the ground a very precise track that they will follow. That is the aspect of next gen that raises the ire of communities, because the paths become so narrow that you're constantly being overflown very precisely by aircraft one right after another, right after another.
Wake Recat is also another tenant.
Wake Recat is part of next gen as well. But, next gen's really gotten a bad rap from all the noise. But like Emily started out saying in the very beginning of this, is you've seen one airport, you've seen one airport. The question is, can next gen be used to the benefit of the surrounding communities? And in certain circumstances it can. So it's not all bad. I mean, like I said, at Atlanta, we were able to use the precision of those tracks to put the airplanes over a specific area that the communities wanted the airplanes to fly over because it was the least impactful to that community.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, the very precise ground track was a good thing. In other cases, a very precise ground track may not be a good thing. Dispersion of the noise over a broader area may be a good thing. And if that's something that, the communities around the airport, want to pursue, that's something that they can pursue. So it's not next gen per se, it's the application. And if you're doing it in concert with the surrounding communities, it can be a very good thing.
So the follow-up to that, and we talked about this a little yesterday, but just want to bring it up, for the council, was the dichotomy in this is that the increase, which I think shows somewhat to Steve's point relative to the DNL as the measurement, is that the dichotomy is that as the flight tracks become more precise, and so the window of variation is closed, the contour shrinks, even though the people being overflown are getting killed, because the frequency is increased so much, but the frequency is increased so much within a more constrained space. So that's just a complete anomaly relative to relieving impacts or identifying, identifying impacts. And I think, Emily, you spoke to that a little yesterday at our meeting, or whoever, just comment on that, please.
Yeah, I mean, it is really interesting. I mean, I look back at the national advocacy work I do, and I remember, you know, Next Gen, because what Next Gen really is a federal policy body. It's, you know, the FAA's movement from ground-based to satellite-based, you know, air traffic control. And that was something that that our national organization that I'm the professional staff of supported, right? Because you really, if, like Jim said, if you use it, in places like Atlanta, where he designed the tracks to go over, you know, what our friend down there calls, you know, the highways in the sky, and it's, you can use it as a really strong tool. But what has happened is that the noise impact has changed because that frequency and that concentration. And so really, I mean, the noise impact, what I mean when I say it's changed is I mean the perception, how people perceive it and how people experience that noise has changed from traditional procedures. So I don't know if that's what I said yesterday, I don't remember, but it is a very interesting, it's been very interesting to see unfold over the last decade or so. And you know, there's still the Next Gen Advisory Committee, they're still talking about this at the federal level and how to best implement and where the benchmarks are, and it's still very much an ongoing process. And I think the community engagement part should have been addressed right from the beginning, and there's a lot of catch up that needs to be done, but we're moving in that direction. And something that I think is being talked about, I have not been in the room for this, but I have heard second or third hand that's being talked about from the sort of the education or the university standpoint or side is, you know, how are we going to capture that impact? Do we need, you know, looking forward, how is that impact going to be captured because it's changed so much?
Yeah, just one point of clarification, the contour won't get smaller, it'll just change shape, so it'll get longer and more narrow. But I just don't want anybody to think that, you know, if we put in RNAV, we're sort of hiding or, you know, changing the contour. It'll get longer probably. And in a lot of ways, the ground directly under that contour is probably going to have an increase in noise exposure. So hopefully, you know, airports and FAA will allow some kind of mitigation, you know, to accommodate that change in.
Right, but I think the point to make about that is that maybe the spatial dynamic of the contour remains relatively the same. It's being constrained and then extended, but the intensity of the experience of the people in the contour is what I think is not appropriately being captured, because it's all being, you know, logarithmically averaged. Okay,
Yeah, a lot of projects we work on, we actually advocate for use of supplemental metrics, so time above, number of events above, and going down well below 65. So show the community the current number of events over, say, 55 decibels, and then post-project, how's that going to look, so they understand, you know, because like you said, DNL, nobody really understands. So we really advocate for supplemental metrics so folks really get the full picture.
Because people don't hear in averages.
And the other
Don't
piece.
experience in averages either.
Yeah.
Right.
The other piece is, and this has to be a decision of the communities, is do you want to stick with the departures that you have now, or do you want to go to a diverse vector area headings off of the airport? I mean, let me tell you, you know, any controller worth his salt, if you give him multiple headings to use off the runway, they're going to take that in a heartbeat. They can spray airplanes all over the sky if that's what you want. But that's would have to be a piece, you know, that's that whole thing about advocating for a change, the Part 150, what does it look like if these airplanes are dispersed within a wedge, and what is the impact, you know, what does the noise contours look like then, you know, and then, you know, is that what you want? Is it solving a problem for the folks that are on runway heading basically today, but increasing an issue for people all over the place, but you're sharing the noise basically over a much broader area? So, you know, those are the kind of political questions that you guys have to deal with, you know, within the 4 cities to determine, you know, hey, you know, what options do we have, and which one do we think is the most beneficial to us to try to advocate for? So,
Okay, I'd like to recognize David Clark.
This is a sort of a follow-up to the notion of what the alternatives are and an assessment of their likelihood of success and the timing and so forth. We haven't been talking much about impact avoidance here. I think what we all like is that the sort of the end game here is a new airport, and that's going to be a big battle. It's going to be fought, but sure, that's impact avoidance. On impact mitigation, we're working on it. We've got a little bit of that. The port plants some trees, you know, and they put in non-working insulation and so forth. I've got a little bit more ambitious idea that perhaps first do no harm. We have a lot of people that are impacted here. The port is literally getting away with murder in the construction which is going on right now, which did not get environmental review. The damage that is being done is incredible. So, along those lines, I've asked port personnel on a couple of occasions. I've asked, can we get a nighttime curfew? And they say, no, we're prohibited from doing that. On another occasion, I said, well, how about landing fees for impact mitigation? And they say, no, we can't do that. Can't do it. Not possible. At the time, I accepted their answers at face value. I asked Representative Smith not too long ago the same questions. I said, I said, the port says we can't do this. Representative Smith said, oh, they can do that. They can do that. He said that, but he says that it just doesn't fit in with their business model.
He said they could fine people for
Not talking about finding, talking about, no,
landing fees.
talking about landing
That's all
fees.
gonna trigger a 161. Correct me if I'm wrong, but if they do increase landing fees, because this is something I've explored at major airports across the country, because it's not, you're not wrong. I mean, it would solve a lot of problems, but I believe that if they did, if the airport were to do increased landing fees, that would trigger a 161, meaning that would trigger that long-term process of every, you know, very expensive process that the one that we've only seen work is in Naples, and that was because of a lawsuit in tandem. So that, I need to look a little bit more into that, and I'm not sure why, if there was, you know, maybe he's talking about something else that would be possible, but that is my understanding I mean, I've had people even come up with the idea of a market incentive, right? So, but that also would trigger a 161.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, but it would,
Fees is
yeah.
essentially market incentive
Yeah.
and impact mitigation.
Yeah.
Yeah, the issue seems to be what is our perspective here? And Representative Smith, I couldn't follow up the question because of time, but I got the sense that he was saying, yeah, we can just change the rules. And so, along with this thing you talk about, an assessment of alternatives and their likelihood, I would imagine along with that would go what the actions would be required to take it. Does it require King County or the state of Washington or the feds to change the rules so that we could do landing fees, so that we could do curfews?
And that is something that in my my national advocacy hat that has been sort of a topic of discussion. And if I didn't open with this, I'm a professional staff also of a national nonprofit that's airport adjacent communities. And one of the things, and that's sort of when I talk about the top-down approach, one of the things that other communities have looked at is exactly that, is what, you know, because in Europe there is, you know, there's curfews and there's all of these things that we would like to try that would make that difference here. In my opinion, it would take an extremely large national lobby. And, you know, because the lobby against that, against the Congress changing the rules, are the airlines. And, you know, and the FAA and this, you know, then, and industry as a whole. And, you know, that is a very, very strong lobby. So, sure, Congress could change those laws and the FAA would have to implement that. It would, I think, be a long-term national campaign that would have to involve every single airport-adjacent community, you know, and I'm not being political here, but it would have to have both Democrats in the House and the Senate and the White House, I would assume, just because of how I see the politics playing out.
It's environmental
Yeah,
in
because,
nature.
right.
Yeah, I don't like hearing that's against the rules. I really don't like hearing that one. First of all, the things like it's against our business model, which is what Representative Smith says is really what's going on with the Port of Seattle. All right, we'll change the business model. Stop including killing people in your business model. Number two, it says if change the rules to the national rules. I don't like hearing we can't think about that.
I mean, it's
So I
certainly-
encourage you to keep minds open.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's definitely being discussed elsewhere, and I think that, you know, it's a very heavy lift, but if that's like the long-term stuff we're talking about, right? That's the stuff that, you know, talking about research and development and how to, you know, make quieter planes, all this stuff is decades long, but it's stuff that we're certainly thinking about, and I appreciate, you know, it comes up a lot. You know, you're not alone in bringing this up, none of you are, and I think if other communities across the country are all thinking about this kind of stuff too.
Okay, we're running close to the hard stop that we have. I want to check with Mark Prue, who's on the line, see if he had any questions to bring forward.
Hang on a second, I had you on mute. So, one question I have, and maybe perhaps we already know the answer among ourselves, but just for fun, are there the particular SeaTac Airport is operated by the Port of Seattle, which is, you know, kind of a quasi-governmental agency. Is that a common kind of political, you know, airport management structure, or are we in some way unique in that regard?
That's a really good question. I don't know that I've interacted with another airport that's got the same. I was asking a lot of questions about that today throughout the day with staff at the city. Is, you know, what is the sort of oomph behind the commission, and because it's very different in every airport that I've sort of engaged with. It's got a different setup. I mean, Atlanta's owned by the city of Atlanta, but you know, it's not in Atlanta.
New York Airport's under Port Authority.
New York's under Port Authority. Minneapolis is run by a statewide board that then has a metropolitan board that you know, that manages it. So it's very different everywhere. But I don't know. I would have to really research a little bit if there's a exact similar setup that you guys have. But I don't know that answer.
That may be.
That's all I have. I don't want to monopolize this more time.
Thank you. That may be helpful for us to know, though, so we can understand what we're really dealing with. And then I think, Steve, I'm going to give you the last question.
It's not my place to do this, but I was hoping we could get some public comment in before the consultants left. So I was just wondering, it's not my job to make that call.
Well, I understand where you're coming from. I have 6 minutes to a hard stop, which makes it very difficult. And I apologize that we weren't able to include public comment in tonight. But again, the purpose of our work study is to have the kind of interaction you've all experienced here. Hopefully, we've asked a lot of the questions that you wanted to get asked. The other thing I would say is that we, as a council, we are always welcome to, we always welcome anybody to correspond with us through email and writing or whatever. We'll make sure the council, the aviation advisory, and the consultants get those questions so we can get those back to you, and they do become part of our public record. Again, I apologize, but with the hard stop, we just didn't have the flexibility in the schedule. Having said that, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Michael to wrap up.
Thank you, Mayor. hard stuff, so I'll have to say this in 4 minutes so you can catch your plane. I'd like to say that this was an important day that we spent a lot of time preparing for. And the day included, obviously, this meeting with our council. Appreciate a number of people from other cities are here, especially Burien, I think. We appreciate the efforts of our consultants to go through a very long day in Des Moines. We probably had somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 staff involved in the process today in terms of meetings and briefings and participation. We had all of our senior staff. I think Susan spent almost the whole day with our consultants, as has Tim, through different activities. And so I think that overall what it shows to me, and the voluntary efforts also of our Aviation Advisory Committee, who bring a lot to the table in terms of knowledge and understanding and perspective. What it shows to me is a commitment of this city to leave no stone unturned in trying to find a way to mitigate the impacts of SeaTac Airport on our city. And with that, I appreciate your engagement here, your participation. We look forward to continuing this relationship. Hopefully we have other opportunities like this to talk with council and the Aviation Advisory Committee and the community about steps that we're taking, possible steps we could take, actions we've taken, hopefully measurable actions that bring results. So I think the same thing with dealing with the airport and the port and START committee and the 4 cities, all of us at this point, relative to those things, are pursuing one single focus, and that is outcomes that achieve mitigation, achieve relief for our community. So this is one step, but I think a significant step forward in that pursuit, and I thank everyone for being a part of this.
And with that, I also want to extend the thanks of the council for the aviation advisory we have is outstanding. The way that the teams cooperate across city, I think, is absolutely amazing. I feel like we are in a good position to make progress. And, you know, it's taken a long time to get here. And, you know, sometimes this is the appropriate path. To cite Mr. Edmonston from earlier, I heard him say, well, you want to work through all the issues first before you go to trial. And, you know, I'm not saying that there's a guarantee of going to trial, but what I am saying is you do want to work through the issues. You want to have the science. You want to have the facts. We are all affected by this, and we get very emotional about it. Unfortunately, the emotion won't get us anywhere. It may motivate us, and we can be thankful for that, but it won't win the argument. We have to have the facts. We have to have the right presentation of those facts, and we really have to be effective so that prevailing wisdom will hopefully fall on our side. So I just want to thank everybody for their time tonight. And as Michael said, hopefully we will have other opportunities. I want to repeat that any community member or public member who would like to share their comments with us through an email or in some other form of writing, we're happy to hear it. I will say that our next meeting will be on a regular council meeting on June 13th here, and if we will have public comment in that. So if there are folks that really want to make their comments from the podium will be there at our next council meeting. And with that, I believe we are within about 30 seconds of your hard stop, so do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Councilmember Nutting, seconded by Councilmember Bangs. All those in favor, raise your right hand, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you for coming.